Welcome to the first video of the video series Plainchant for Beginners. I hope that the weather where you are is looking as nice as it is over here in Bristol. I've got a lovely kind of clear sky over here, and I'm out in the garden with the lovely flowers. It's just a wonderful time of the year. It's a wonderful time in the year to learn something new, a hobby or an interest, to pursue something, and for some of you that might be learning to sing, or you might want to learn about and explore Gregorian chant, that beautiful, meditative, subtle art, that wonderful singing that is formed part of the Christian Church for well over 1,000 years. And so I thought, I might do a couple of videos about that, and if this is helpful to anybody, then it'll be worth my time. I am Carlos Rodriguez. I conduct the Schola Cantorum at Fisher House, and we sing lots of Plainchant every week for the Mass. And in my experience, we have all kinds of people singing Plainchant with us, people who have sung it for years, it's part of their musical upbringing, or we have people who are complete beginners, and in my experience, people pick it up very quickly. It's not this kind of complicated, really difficult thing to learn. It's fairly simple, fairly intuitive, and it is best learned with other people. So in a choir, singing it every week, and sharing it with other people. Like all music, it's best done with other people. So now that we're all kind of locked down and we can't really sing in choirs yet, what a better way to spend the time than to learn some music with each other, even if it's virtually. So I thought the first video, which I should prelude with a bit of a disclaimer, which is that I don't want to do something that's very scholarly or that's very detailed or thorough. I just want to kind of give a basic outline so that that's accessible and that we can all learn to enjoy this repertoire in more depth. This first video is therefore just going to be a brief history of this music that we now know as Gregorian chant or Plainchant, and just discussing a bit how it evolved, what it is, and how it affects us, and maybe why we should feel curious about it and why we should want to explore it. So it's not a video that you should feel that you have to watch all the way through, or that you have to take notes on, or have to listen to with much depth. It's not essential. If you just want to skip it and go on to the next video and actually look at the music, then that's by all means fine. I just thought it might be useful to talk about the history of this music a bit, just to whet your appetite. So, Gregorian chant. I suppose that we have to go all the way back to the very first centuries of the church, so the first and the second centuries, to think about what this new developing Christian liturgy was doing. And the first point is that the early Christian liturgy had a lot in common with the Jewish rituals and the Jewish liturgy of the temple in Jerusalem. And one of the central items of that liturgy was the chanting of the Psalms of David, which are of course far older, much older than Christianity, and they were always meant to be sung. They were written as songs. You can even see it in some of the Psalms. They've got little instructions of pauses and people to come in, and they were chanted in the Jewish tradition, and then in the early Christian tradition they were also chanted to simple formulas, much like we do today. So it all really begins with the Psalms. And another important development in Plainchant is the rise of what's known as monasticism. So in the kind of 4th, 5th, 6th centuries, even earlier, you get communities of people who want to form a lifestyle that is completely centered on prayer, communal prayer. And famously, we have Saint Benedict, who devises his own flavour of monastic life, as it were, called the Benedictine order, and they pray 7 times a day. Their motto is ora et labora, so that's to work and to pray. And so they pray these 7 times a day, and whenever they pray the psalms, and they sing the psalms. And this is known as a divine office, or the liturgy of the hours, as we know it today. And so throughout the centuries that grows and that develops, and you have different chants that get added to that to enrich it. So antiphons and responsories and hymns and all other kinds of chants, as well as the psalms. And that evolves. And at the same time, of course, we have the Mass, so the liturgy that surrounds the Eucharist. That also evolves, and we get different types of chants adorning that. The Kyrie, which is in Greek, so that's very early. The fact that it's in Greek tells us that it's early. That was the early language of the Church. And then things like the Gloria, the Agnus Dei, the Sanctus, what we know as the ordinary of the Mass, and then the other elements of the Mass that we know as the proper of the Mass. So the ordinary of the Mass never changes. In every Mass we have a Sanctus and a Kyrie, and a Gloria if it's in season, not if it's in Lent or Advent. The proper of the Mass changes every week, or every day. And those are things like introit, graduals, the communion, the offertory, and they're a bit like the readings in Mass. They change all the time. Anyway, these evolve throughout the first centuries of the Church, and it's really important to understand that they evolve locally. It's not like today, if I'm the abbot of my abbey here in South Bristol, I can't get in contact with the abbess of an abbey in North Germany. I just couldn't do it back then, unless I undertake an enormous voyage. Obviously, communication wasn't easy in the medieval period, but I can talk with the abbot in North Bristol. So that means that I can discuss my liturgy with the abbot of North Bristol, and we can look at books, we can copy each other's books, and so that's what happened. And you get little localized pockets of liturgy where they start doing the same things throughout the Christian West, and they end up developing into what we now know as rites of the Church. So you have the Mozarabic rite in Spain, you have the Gallican rite in France, you have the Ambrosian rite that develops in Milan, in Italy, the Roman rite, of course, all these different types of rites. And this takes us to the reign of Charlemagne, the Holy Roman Emperor, who was in charge of the Holy Roman Empire, and he was very, very concerned that there should be unity in his empire. And he was a very religious man. He was made king. He was crowned in St. Peter's Basilica on Christmas Day. He was very concerned then that his whole kingdom should be unified, and that meant worshipping in the same way. So he wanted the Roman rite to be observed in all of his kingdom. And for lots of people in the kingdom, that wasn't very good news, because they quite enjoyed singing their psalms in the way that they sang them, and all the other elements of the liturgy. But, nonetheless, Charlemagne was very keen, and he sent some deacons to France, where you had the Gallican rite, and other rites as well, and they sang Frankish chant. So you had people coming from Rome who sang Roman chant, and then they were mixing with people who sang Frankish chant. And what ended up happening was a merging of the two chants. So the Franks, they weren't very happy. They said, okay, we'll take some of your chant, but we'll keep these bits. and the Romans eventually they gave up in trying to convince them. So you got this new repertory of chant, and it kept on growing, of Roman and Frankish chant that evolved. And this is important because this is where we get most of the of our music today from. This body, he needed to find a way, Charlemagne, to convince everybody that this was the better chant. You stop singing your Mozarabic chants and your Ambrosian chants. You should sing this new chant that's very Roman. And so there came this story that Pope Saint Gregory the Great, who was alive during the 7th century, that he wrote this chant, or that he compiled it. He didn't write it. It was the Holy Spirit that wrote this chant, and you get images of a dove whispering into Pope St. Gregory's ear, and he's writing it down. Much like how that plane above me was making an awful racket, the Holy Spirit was dictating these chants to the Pope. And this myth caught like wildfire. There was some truth to it in the fact that Pope St. Gregory was a great supporter of sacred music and of chant. He might have founded a schola in Rome, and he certainly looked after this chant. But Charlemagne, not Charlemagne himself, but this myth developed around the time that Pope St. Gregory wrote the chant. Anyway, caught like wildfire, everyone wanted to sing this chant because it came straight from God, and the name stuck to Gregorian chant. And I suppose at the next stop then, we've now covered the early medieval period. If we take a jump to the 16th century, to the time of the Reformation, the Protestant Reformation, and the Counter-Reformation, or the Catholic Reformation, as some people call it, there was again this question of unification, that everybody should sing the Roman chants. So what happened is that in the 1560s and onwards there was a revision made to all the chant books, and the local rites, unless they were older than 200 years old, which is why the Ambrosian rite survives in Milan, they were terminated, and the Roman rite was adopted with a new chant that was revised, famously by Palestrina. He was on the commission to revise this new chant. Anyway, they didn't do a very good job of revising this chant. They cut it up, they made it shorter. They thought that all the long, beautiful lines that we now enjoy, they were a bit too medieval, a bit too grotesque. They cut it. And that's how the chant stayed in what was a unified body of chant across the whole of Europe. The council succeeded in its aim to unify mostly the worship of Christendom, and it carried on like that for lots of years, for centuries, until we arrive at the time of Pope Pius X, and he was a great believer in the beauty, in the power of Plainchant, of Gregorian chant, and he ordered another revision of the chant, and this revision was carried out by the monks of Salem, Benedictine monks. Remember that these Benedictines are daily involved in this cycle of prayer and of singing. And these monks of Salem, they embark on an enormous piece of, an enormous work to look at all the old manuscripts, and they eventually, they cover an enormous amount of sources, and they produce a new edition of the Plainchant, the Salem edition of the Gradual, so that's the music for the Mass, and of the Antiphona, which is the music for the office. Anyway, that's kind of it, because those are the editions that most of us are still using today, with this square notation. It's a type of notation that's fairly easy to understand, and it's what we'll be discussing in the following videos. But I'll finish with this on the issue of notation. Chant, at the very, very beginning, wasn't written down. And in the earliest sources, we have just the words. So that means that it was passed on via an oral tradition. It was conveyed in singing, and people learned it and they remembered it, which is astonishing to us today. I mean, could you imagine remembering all these pieces of music? It's absolutely astonishing. It was like a language. People just knew what the music would do, the turns that it would take. So it was intuitive to them as well as an exercise in memory. Then what these people, these cantors and these priests and these monks developed in the kind of 8th, 9th centuries, they developed a way of just jogging their memories in case they forgot. So they discovered some kind of symbols that, very basic, that they would write on top of the words. So if the music went up, they would kind of draw an up thing, and if the music went down, then they would draw a downwards looking symbol. And those are known as neumes, Neumes. And that then developed this notation of music, which was, you can't read it from these sources unless you know the melody, because it just says go up, but you don't know how far up to go, you don't know what note it is, you can't use it. Eventually, what happened is that monks and cantors and clerics, they discovered a way to write down the chant with its pitch by using lines. So at the beginning it was one line, and then you drew your symbols around the line, and then it told you if it was high or low relative to that line, and then it was 2 lines, 3 lines, and we now have 4 lines along with the neumes to tell us exactly what the notes that we should sing are. Anyway, I've warbled on for far too long. I'm going to enjoy a bit more of this sum. I hope that's helpful to you, and that's got you interested in the subject. And do let me know in the comments if there's anything specific that I should cover. And I will see you in the next video, where we will introduce the notation. We'll be looking at some Plainchant on the page and just talking about how it works, how we might start singing it. Alright? Wonderful. Well, take care then. Goodbye.